I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. The most common regret of the dying, but a message I've heard from people my age, people who on the outside look wildly successful and happy, right? But deep down on the inside, they're battling themselves and the person they want to be, the life they aspire to live. And I can't help but just be a little baffled, I guess, that we need this quality, courage, a quality we typically associate with mythical heroes, crime stoppers, the extraordinary, to just live a life true to ourselves. Courage is typically defined as the ability to control your fear in a dangerous or difficult situation. So, by that definition, to be authentic, to live true to ourselves, feels dangerous or difficult. It invokes this feeling of fear. And quite honestly, for 22 years, I felt the exact same way. And maybe you do too. When I was thinking about all of this, trying to understand why do we feel fear, to just be true to ourselves. And what it all boils down to is from the time we were young through adulthood, we received and have carried this message, the association that being our authentic selves doesn't go hand in hand with belonging and love. It's not necessarily the big moments or experiences that have built this sentiment. It's honestly the little ones, the ones that fly under the radar, the ones that you probably don't remember. It's when you're at school and a teacher or a classmate makes a remark about you or tells you to stop doing something. It's when you're at home and your parents or another family member makes a critique of you, a judgment, or compares you. And in those moments, as a kid, you internalize that sentiment, that messaging, that who you are authentically, your true self, isn't worthy, because it's only resulted in ridicule, judgment. And when you feel that way, you're willing to sacrifice, to hide away parts of your authentic self in order to meet that deeper human need for love and belonging. But ultimately, we carry this fear way past childhood into adulthood and beyond. We live out of fear of being unworthy, being unloved. We live inauthentically, but in doing so, what we don't realize is that we're just continuing to perpetuate and reinforce the sentiment that if we show our authentic selves, then we'll be rejected, we'll be cast out, we won't belong, we won't be loved. Everything you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear. It's fitting that courage is needed to embrace fear. Because at the root of courage is the Latin word cur, which means heart. Because fear only shows up in the moments when deep down in our hearts We know that whatever action lies in front of us is one we need to take for ourselves. It shows up when we hesitate, when it feels like every cell in our body is telling us to run away. Because something deeply important to us is at stake. And while we do feel fear when our physical well-being is in jeopardy, the fear that you or I typically face in our day-to-day lives is a fear for our emotional well-being, is whatever action lies in front of us represents our sense of belonging and our ability to be loved. When I think about my own life, the moment in which I felt the most fear, the most hesitation, and required the most amount of courage was on December 28th, 2020. I had been home for about a month on winter break during my last year of college. There were events that had happened the past couple months that led me to start unpacking my childhood trauma. Trauma I didn't know existed, but was deeply affecting how I thought, how I lived. And as I started to connect the dots to understand this narrative that I'd been telling myself, that I've been living by, so much of it was in the little moments from my upbringing, the moments I'd repressed a long time ago. Having understood all this, on the 28th, I remember sitting at the dining table, having just finished breakfast with my mom. We were the only two in the house. And as she was putting the dishes away, I sat there, alone in my thoughts, fighting back and forth, hesitating on whether I should tell her all the things I've learned and come to understand about my upbringing and myself. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. But for some reason, I was able to recognize that hesitation, the feeling of fear, and tell myself, this is something you need to do. Because throughout my entire life, over 20 years, in so many similar situations, whether with my parents, whether with friends, romantic interests, I'd stayed silent. I didn't express how I felt. I didn't show up as my true, authentic self. Because I carried the sentiment that being who I truly am was inadequate and unworthy of belonging, of being loved. The thing is, the only way to be courageous, to embrace and end the cycle of fear, is to bring in a much stronger feeling, a feeling of love. People say they wish they had courage, as if it's this quality that is reserved for extraordinary people doing extraordinary things. But the thing is, when we think about courage, about having heart, that's something we all have. Something we've all demonstrated time and time again throughout our life. And it's not necessarily those big moments that we hear about or see in the news and social media. It's the little moments, the ones that fly under the radar, the ones we tend to forget about. It's when you tell someone how you truly feel. It's when you set a boundary. It's when you choose to look yourself in the mirror, to confront, to understand, and then embrace those hard feelings and experiences that you've been running away from. It's when, despite feeling inadequate, unworthy, unlovable, you continue to show up each and every day. Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear. Oftentimes, it's easier to be courageous for someone or something else. So when I think about how to be more courageous, ultimately, you need to ask yourself, if the most important person in the world to me asked if I could be courageous for them, could I do it? Definitely biased here, but I'd hope the answer would be yes, because the most important person in the world is you. So it's not a question of whether or not you're courageous. It's more of a question of whether you'll continue to be for yourself and the parts of your life that truly matter to you. And over time, the more you show up for yourself, the more you embrace fear, the more you nurture that courage muscle, the more you cultivate that love for yourself, and the more equipped you'll be to live a life without regret, a life true to yourself.